Hey everyone, and welcome. Now when people talk about apartheid in South Africa, the word racism immediately comes to mind. And yes, it was deeply, profoundly racist. But it's so important to understand that this wasn't just a case of bad attitudes or individual prejudice. No, apartheid was a meticulously designed system. It was racism legalized, racism codified, racism enforced with the full, brutal power of the state. It was lived through some of the most cruel and dehumanizing laws ever written, laws that dictated every single facet of a person's existence based purely on the color of their skin. These weren't vague suggestions. They were rigid structures designed to separate, to subjugate, and to control. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on that system. We're not just going to talk about the general idea of apartheid, we're going to look at the nuts and bolts, the actual legal machinery that made it possible. We explore three of the most oppressive apartheid laws that shaped and shattered millions of lives. These laws were the pillars upon which the entire edifice of apartheid stood, each one reinforcing the others, creating a web of restrictions that was almost impossible to escape. Understanding these specific pieces of legislation is crucial to grasping the true, lived reality of apartheid. It's a heavy topic, I know, but it's one we need to confront to understand not just South Africa's past, but how these legacies continue to echo into the present. We're going to break it down piece by piece to see how this system was built and what it meant for the people who lived under it. This is From Cape to Kruger Discover Mzansi. Let's get into it. So, where do you even begin to build a society based entirely on racial segregation? Well, the apartheid government had an answer. You start by labeling everyone. The Population Registration Act of 1950 was the very foundation, the cornerstone of the whole rotten system. Its purpose was chillingly simple: to classify every single person in South Africa into a specific racial group, primarily white, colored, Indian, or black African. This wasn't just a census, this was a permanent, life-defining brand. Imagine your entire future, your rights, your place in society, decided by a government official looking at you and making a judgment. And how did they make these judgments? Sometimes it was based on appearance, lineage, or general acceptance, but it often descended into the utterly absurd and deeply humiliating. You've probably heard of the infamous pencil test. If an official was unsure about someone's race, particularly if they were suspected of being colored, trying to pass as white, or black trying to pass as colored, they might stick a pencil in their hair. If the pencil stayed in, you were deemed to have a certain type of hair, and therefore you were classified accordingly, often as black or colored. If it fell out, you might pass as white. Think about that for a moment. Your destiny, dictated by the physics of a pencil in your hair. It's almost comical if it weren't so devastatingly tragic and real for millions. This classification wasn't just a label on a piece of paper, it was everything. It determined where you could live, what kind of education you could receive, what jobs you were allowed to do, who you were legally permitted to marry or have relations with, even which ambulance would come for you in an emergency, or which park bench you could sit on. Families were torn apart by these classifications. One sibling might be classified as colored, another as black, based on the arbitrary whims of an official on a particular day. This law created rifts within communities and even within families, forcing people into boxes that often didn't reflect their own identities or heritage. The psychological toll of this act was immense. It was a constant reminder that your very being was being scrutinized, judged, and categorized by a hostile state. It stripped people of their individuality and reduced them to a racial stereotype, a cog in the apartheid machine. The architects of apartheid knew that to control a population, you first had to define and divide them. The Population Registration Act did exactly that, laying the groundwork for all the other discriminatory laws that would follow, ensuring that the hierarchy they envisioned was legally entrenched from birth. This act effectively created a caste system, where your assigned race determined your value in the eyes of the state. There was no escaping it. Your identity card, your dampas, which we'll talk more about later, carried this racial classification, and it had to be produced on demand. It was the key that unlocked, or more often locked, doors to opportunities and basic human rights. The legacy of these classifications, the social and economic divisions they entrenched, are wounds that South Africa is still working to heal today, decades after the law was repealed. It showed the world how bureaucracy could be weaponized to enact profound, lasting injustice. So once everyone was neatly labeled by the Population Registration Act, The next step for the apartheid regime was to decide where these different racial groups could, and more importantly, could not live. This was the job of the Group Areas Act, also passed in 1950. This law was the legal basis for the forced segregation of residential and business areas along racial lines. It sounds almost clinical when you say it like that, segregation of areas, but the reality was brutal, heartbreaking, and involved the mass uprooting of entire communities. Imagine living in a vibrant, mixed-race neighborhood, a place where your family has lived for generations, where you have your home, your business, your friends, your place of worship. Then, one day, the government declares your area a white group area. This meant that if you weren't white, you had to leave. No ifs, ands, or buts. You were forcibly removed, often with little notice and even less compensation for your property. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, mostly black, colored, and Indian South Africans, being systematically dispossessed of their homes and livelihoods. Places like District 6 in Cape Town, a lively, culturally rich and diverse community, were declared white areas. Its residents were forcibly evicted, their homes bulldozed to the ground, leaving an empty scar in the heart of the city that remains a painful reminder to this day. Sophiatown in Johannesburg, another vibrant hub of black culture, music, and intellectual life, met a similar fate. These weren't just evictions, they were the deliberate destruction of communities, the erasure of culture and history, all in the name of racial purity and separation. The trauma of these forced removals echoed through generations, and where did these displaced people go? They were moved, often miles away from city centers, from their jobs, from established infrastructure, to newly created, racially segregated townships. These townships, like Soweto southwestern townships outside Johannesburg, were often underdeveloped, lacking basic services like electricity, proper sanitation, or adequate housing. They were designed to be dormitories for black labor, keeping them close enough to serve the white economy, but far enough to maintain strict racial separation. The Group Areas Act didn't just segregate, it actively underdeveloped and impoverished non-white communities. The scars of the Group Areas Act are still visible on the landscape of South African cities today. You can literally see the legacy of apartheid in the way towns and cities are laid out, the affluent, historically white suburbs, and the sprawling, often still disadvantaged townships on the periphery. It created a deeply unequal and fragmented society, not just socially but spatially. The fight for land, for housing, for equitable urban development in post-apartheid South Africa is a direct consequence of the devastation wrought by this single piece of legislation. It was a law that redrew the map of South Africa, not with ink, but with bulldozers and human suffering. Now, if you've classified everyone by race and dictated where they can live, how do you control their movement? How do you ensure that black South Africans in particular only go where the apartheid state wants them to go, primarily to serve as a labor force in so-called white areas? The answer was a complex and deeply oppressive system of influx control collectively known as the pass laws. These weren't new to apartheid, having roots in earlier colonial policies, but under apartheid, they were intensified, expanded, and enforced with ruthless efficiency, becoming one of the most hated symbols of the regime. At the heart of the pass laws was the requirement for all black African men, and later women, over the age of 16 to carry a reference book or pass book derogatorily known as the Dompas, or stupid pass at all times. This wasn't just an ID, it was a detailed record of a person's life containing their photograph, fingerprints, racial classification, information about their employment, permissions to be in certain areas, tax payments, and any brushes with the law. To be caught without your pass, or with a pass that wasn't in perfect order, meant almost certain arrest, fines, or imprisonment. It was a constant source of fear and humiliation. These laws effectively turned black South Africans into foreigners in their own country. Their freedom of movement was severely restricted. You needed official permission stamped in your passbook to enter urban areas, to seek work there, or even to visit family. Police could stop anyone at any time and demand to see their pass. Failure to produce it, or having any irregularity, led to countless arrests. We're talking millions of arrests over the decades these laws were in force. Prisons were filled with people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, or not having the correct stamp in their little book. It was a system designed to criminalize ordinary life for black people. The pass laws were a major tool for controlling the black labor force, ensuring a steady supply of cheap workers for white-owned farms, mines, and industries, while preventing permanent black urbanization in white South Africa. It also made organizing resistance incredibly difficult, as movement was so tightly controlled. But, these laws also became a focal point for protest and resistance. The tragic Sharpeville massacre on March 21, 1960, was a direct result of a peaceful protest against the pass laws. Police opened fire on unarmed demonstrators, killing 69 people and injuring hundreds more, many shot in the back as they tried to flee. This event sent shockwaves around the world and marked a turning point in the struggle against apartheid. Living under the pass laws meant a daily existence filled with anxiety. It meant the constant threat of harassment, arrest, and the disruption of family life. It was a system that aimed to strip away dignity and control every movement. Imagine having to justify your presence everywhere you went, knowing that a missing stamp or a lost document could land you in jail and separated from your loved ones. The pass laws were more than just an inconvenience. They were a brutal instrument of state control, a daily reminder of one's subjugation under the apartheid regime. They encapsulated the dehumanizing nature of the entire system. So, as we've seen, laws like the Population Registration Act, the Group Areas Act, and the pass laws weren't just side effects of apartheid, they were its very architecture. They didn't just shape apartheid, they enforced, fed, and legitimized it, controlling every conceivable aspect of life for millions of South Africans. From the moment you were born and classified to where you could live, where you could work, who you could love, and even where you could walk freely, these laws formed an iron cage of oppression. They were meticulously designed to ensure the supremacy of a minority and the subjugation of the majority, creating a society built on inequality and fear. It's a stark reminder of how law, which should be a tool for justice, can be twisted into an instrument of profound injustice. But it's also crucial to remember that alongside this systematic oppression, there was always resistance. People fought back, they organized, they protested, and they dreamed of a different South Africa. Understanding these laws is essential to understanding the fight for freedom in South Africa. It helps us appreciate the depth of the struggle, the courage of those who resisted, and the immense challenges involved in dismantling such an entrenched system and building a new, democratic nation from its ruins. The legacy of these laws is still felt today in the social, economic, and spatial inequalities that persist. But by confronting this dark past, by understanding its mechanics, we can better understand the present and continue the work of building a truly free and equal society. Thank you for joining me on this journey through some of apartheid's cruelest laws. Subscribe to From Cape to Kruger Discover Mzansi for more eye-opening stories about South Africa's past and how it shaped the present. Until next time, Hamba Kali.